my manager at the time got sassy with me one night because I was being a very typical 21-year-old. Who drinks beer? This is gross. Oh my God. Ugh, right? And I was being a little snot. And he
Uh-huh.
looked at me and he's like, you're going to sit down and drink a beer every shift until you figure out what these are. Okay, sure. And so I started to do that. I started to drink the things that we had at the bar so I could build my own language to talk about them.
Right.
Right now I'm drinking a Skull Splitter, which has been my favorite beer at the bar for a long time.
Got it.
And how do you explain this dark, rich, beautifully robust, kind of nutty, kind of fruity thing to somebody who walks in and really isn't familiar with anything beyond your standard Ambev lineup, maybe, right? Like
Right.
how do you start developing a common language? Because if you
Mm-hmm.
go, oh yes, this is very malty. What's malt?
Also, yeah, like
You
somebody
know,
who
like
doesn't know
where's
what that means, like that's the last thing they want
exactly,
to hear. Like
exactly,
it's
and that's how you'll
malty.
put people off.
Totally.
So trying to explain, we have a lot of English beers, and we still do. Obviously, pandemic we talked a minute ago has certainly affected supply chain, and we've had to rework what it is we're doing and offering a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you make common these themes that seem foreign and are in fact foreign import beers? But how do you draw it back to an experience that gives them the ability to feel comfortable going for it?
Yeah.
It's
So that kind of that like gets into one of the things you called out on the list, the staff training.
mm-hmm.
So you're talking about the staff training that you received when you
Yep.
started, but like what does your staff training system look like? Like do you sit everybody down and say you're drinking a beer every shift? What do you do?
Not quite, not quite. But it's actually very close. So the best way, our memory is so tied into our sense of taste and smell and the things we do, right? So we try like a best practices. Obviously, it's bar industry. Nothing is perfect. Nothing's 100%. Nothing is even in fact consistent.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have weekly staff meetings, and our goal is we're exposing our staff to new beers, especially if there's new seasonal releases, and that way we're encouraging our staff. We have a one drink per shift policy. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not realistic to expect staff to try all of our new beers every week because we're a smaller team covering many shifts.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we also, if we ask 8 bartenders to try something, you don't want them going through, a third of your case either. So during our weekly staff meeting, we do tend to crack open 1 or 2 of the new beers, try to talk about it, share the experience of what could we relate this to that we already have. If there's something similar, like is there a category we can draw it to? Um,
Okay. So
we've
like
got
what would an example of that be, just to get like super tactical?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got the Dogfish Head Sea Quench Gosa,
Okay.
and that's what we're using. Kind of, we got in Back Pockets Kitty Lime Pie. It's a key lime pie sour.
Okay.
So if someone's asking for a sour or they drink this Dogfish Head Gosa, maybe start telling them about these other beers. Maybe you need to tell them a little bit about this Kitty Lime Pie, which by the way is adorable, very good beer. But it's like drawing these patterns. If they're asking for Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, hey, did you see we got in Toppling Goliath Pseudo Sue Pale Ale? Can you
Mm,
draw these connections together? So we do that with the new beers. We also try, because I have a very new staff, a very young staff who are very much not beer drinkers. We
mm-hmm.
have a very cocktail and spirits focused staff right now, which is awesome.
Right.
But it's a lot of, okay, how do I explain that this hazelnut brown, you can also talk about the Samuel Smith nut brown. And we can
Mm,
talk a little bit about how they're different. One of my favorite training experiences we've done, sit down with an English stout and an American stout and talk about those hop flavors being just a little bit different and what comes through in the American style versus the English style. And are we having those conversations with guests on a daily? No, those conversations aren't coming up, but it gives us the language to build that trust with guests so that when they do come in, they know we're at least aware what we're talking about on some level, and they're more liable and willing to trust our recommendations when
right.
they've heard us talk a little bit more about the nuance. When we've made those successful recommendations in the past, they're more willing to trust us.
So yeah, trust is kind of the North Star that you're keeping in mind with
Absolutely.
all of these all of
Absolutely.
these staff training exercises that you're doing.
Yep.
What other stuff is there? Are there other exercises that you do with the staff? Like when a new person comes on, like what else is there? People are wondering what can we do to help make, especially now, like you're having like people who don't know as much because so much of the industry moved on to other jobs during the pandemic. So many kids have come in and started bartending, serving at these places that have all these awesome beers. How do we get them to be able to, how do we get it so that the guests trust them?
Yeah. So I think level one, teaching your staff how to taste.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we taste things the way we do? Why are certain beers served closer to 30 degrees? What
Mm,
does that do to the way that we experience flavor? One of the conversations I have with guests at the bar a lot is if you're ordering a super light beer and it's ice cold and you're asking me for a chilled mug, which we don't have, maybe we don't need to be looking at beer. Maybe you're trying to drink something that isn't actually enjoyable for you. If you're numbing your taste buds, you want something with a little flavor. So how do we have those genuine conversations, right?
mm-hmm.
But step one is teaching our staff what is tasting, what is the actual sensory experience of that. If you have pizza for lunch that's got some greasy pepperoni on it and you chewed bubble gum on the way in, your first couple of sips of beer aren't going to be
Mm,
representative of how you taste that beer, right? That's
right.
true for everything we taste. So it starts at that ground level so that we don't have food other than popcorn, but popcorn plays into it. Or if you're at a restaurant where you're talking about beer pairings, talking
Right.
about how that sensation of flavor works in the brain and the
Mm-hmm.
mouth. And you don't have to get super high level on it necessarily. Like, hey, beer's real cold. Cold beer means less flavor because tongue goes numb. Taste one, different than taste three because oils and things that hang out in your tongue. Beer has bubbles. Bubbles help clear the flavor. Like you can break it down into levels that aren't super overwhelming. I think sometimes I'm a nerd. We get into like super science talk and some jargon and it gets a little
Totally.
overwhelming. But starting with the basics, one of the other things I like to do right at the beginning is bring beer reps in. They're going
Mm,
to know their product usually and hopefully better than we can explain to staff anyway. Ideally, then it's free samples.
right.
But also you've got another personal connection that helps in with the brain remembering things.
Mm,
Oh yeah, I remember that rep came in and they talked about this beer and this was the process of how they did that. That information that you can share with guests, even if you don't like the beer.
right.
There's beer we have, I don't care for it. I'm not a hophead. I don't really care for, okay, this is Citra, this is Mosaic. Okay, cool. Yeah, this is great. I'm glad you have all these things, but is that my personal preference? No. But can I relay, hey, you know what? The brewer said they really went with these hops because they were looking for this flavor. And that's
Mm-hmm.
really cool. Having those experiences to go back to, even if they don't have the taste memory of it,
Yeah.
building those layers of things to draw on. I think that's kind of that ground level of have a lot of different things that they could possibly go back to before they're building their own. Oh yeah, I've had that beer 6 or 7 times. Here's how I feel about it.
Right.
Sometimes it's even training them to look at, you know what, you've sold 8 of these on a shift. That means it's popular. So if you don't have a personal opinion to give on it, you could say, hey, this is ordered here a lot.
Mm-hmm.
We just got a new case in. This is a fresh keg. Different things that you can say without having that experience too. I think it's really
Totally.
important.
Got it. Okay, that's the base level
Mm-hmm.
in your world. What is next
Yep.
level? Like what are your experienced bartenders? How did they get to become that next level?
It does take a little bit of the commitment to sit there and drink it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, oh no, terrible. And for some folks, that's not accessible. There are folks who have gluten sensitivity issues,
Right.
things like that. Or we do have a huge rise in sober bartenders, which is awesome.
Yeah.
So it kind of depends on the bartender's path and how they want to go about it. Often what we're seeing is the most successful bartenders are committed to putting their own time into it.
Mm-hmm.
Either they're digging into what is Cicerone, they're going and visiting breweries on their own. We do take staff trips. We try for about once a
Nice.
quarter to get into a brewery or a distillery and actually go to where it happens. One, that's fun. It's
Yeah.
super fun to get nerdy with the folks actually putting the work in to make the things you sell.
Mm-hmm.
But it also connects that, oh, yeah, okay, so this is what fermentation looks like. Here's these smells that I smell. And And some of that is like a coaxing or a rewarding, like, hey, I see that you're doing this. Here's a couple beers on us. Hey, I saw you're really interested in these sours. I'm putting in an order from this brewery this week. Do you want to help me go through and let's take a look and analyze maybe which of these we want to bring in? So
Nice.
bringing them in on the ordering process too.
Oh, I bet. I've never really thought about that.
Yeah, because then you
That's a
get your
great
staff
idea.
invested.
Mm-hmm.
Invested, right? Invested? Yeah, invested. Just this week, so we're a British bar. We have mostly import beer, aiming for European or Iowa or domestic. Heavily focused on sours right now, seasonality wise. Some funky IPAs, but sours have been really, really popular even throughout the winter, which is interesting.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was weird. I just before this was going through like, hey, we need to check dates on some of these beers because our dark beers didn't sell all winter long, which was really, really weird. But I have a bartender who's like, hey, you know what? We had a staff party on Sunday and we said, grab any beer from the bar you want, or if there's something we don't have and you want, like, go ahead and bring it with you. And we had one newer bartender brought a 12-pack of Kona's Big Wave. And it's not a beer I've ever really looked at bringing in. It's not one I would organically choose. But this newer bartender took the initiative to bring something that they enjoy to the staff party so we could try it. So of course I'm going to bring a case of that in. I know that person is going to sell it. I know that they're going to feel valued.
Right.
Which is primo. The investing in your staff is the number one way to get an ROI. I mean, hands down. But bringing in things that we've got a bartender, we have Negro Modelo, which I love. It's one of my favorite beers. It's not selling super well. So we need to reevaluate where it exists because it can't just be about what Darian likes. I wish sometimes, but that's not how it works. So we've got a bartender who is really, really convinced that if they had Modelo Especial, they would sell that. They think that would be great for the summer. They would love it. Do I want to bring it in? Not necessarily. Do I have faith in them? Absolutely. So that's what we're going to do. So I think looking at the ordering and getting folks invested, that is one of the best ways for success, because it doesn't matter if I think it's super cool that there's this habanero sriracha beer,
right,
if my staff isn't invested in selling it.
Totally.
You know? So that's I think where that next step is getting them to take ownership in the selection and sharing that too.
And you get them to take ownership by, like you were saying, investing in them, like showing that like, hey, you're going to be able to be a part of this, and
absolutely
you're going to help us grow.
The other way we do that is we offer a certain amount of dollars per year for staff who want to pursue certifications.
Oh, cool.
So if our staff wanted to go do level 1 Cicerone or level 2 Cicerone, we would pay for that.
Nice.
We start all of our bartenders on an entry level, like it's called Bar Smarts. It's a spirits training program, spirits and cocktail training program.
Okay.
And we are a Bar Smarts venue, so that's actually paid for by Bar Smarts because we hold all of our staff to that standard.
Okay.